Tabletop Sydney presents In a world, one man must answer the question: how do you place boards correctly? But also, how does he segue out of this bit?
Like this. Thank you guys for tuning in to our first strategy video. Today we're going to be talking about game board placement as well as lethal hexes and objective placement. But why? Because you guys asked for it. So thank you so much for your suggestions. If you guys want any more tactics, put comments in the comments section. Clearly I listen to you guys and I want to do what you guys want. So anyway, we're going to start at the top, at the initial roll off. Now when you roll your 4 dice at the start, you got basically a 50-50 chance to get a choice here. If your opponent wins, you got to adapt. If you win the dice roll off, you get to choose one of two things, and that is to place your board first and get 3 objectives, or to place second and get 2. If you choose second though, you get to choose the alignment. Now, instinctively, especially if you're playing objective warbands, you're gonna wanna say, oh, I'll put it down first, I'll get my 3 objectives, and I'll feel happy about that. My argument here is 9 times out of 10, you wanna be placing your board second. It gives you much more tactical choice on the board placement. You get to do the setup that works for your warband or works against your opponent's warband. And so that is what I suggest for you guys. There are some edge cases where going first is better. Usually that's when you don't really care what the setup is. That'll be very rare though. Anyway, let's talk about the 3 setups here. We've got our second camera so we can go through these boards. Initially here, I've set this up to be a straight on placement. So this is generally if you want to have some nice big open areas, you want to come in at your opponent, you're playing aggro, this is sort of how you want to play it here. Now, you can place the board a lot of different ways, but in reality there are 3 different ways. The second one is if we move to this. This is called an offset. Now yes, you can do 1 less hex each way all the way down to straight on, but in reality, it's better to do one of these 2. If you want to offset a little bit, why don't you want to offset it a lot? That's the question, and there's not really a good answer. This is good because the distance between these opposite corners is a long way away. You have this short space you can come in, but also the area inside the boards is quite big. There's a lot of open space here that you can work with. So you're basically choke pointing your opponent in the middle here, and then on the other side, you have a lot of space to work with. The third board placement is longboarding like this. Now this is a bit of a difficult setup to get right. A lot of people shy away from this because it's kind of complicated and it changes how the game works quite a bit. This is good when you have a slow opponent and they have to filter in slowly into you. You can keep your valuable pieces safe at the back while putting your big heavy hitters or your big tanky guys at the front. Let's say you're playing Seraphon. You might put Clacktrock here, and you might put your little skinks back at the back here, keep them nice and safe. Suddenly your opponent has to go past him. If you're playing Kanan's Reapers, let's grab Kanan here, put him on the board, maybe you put him here. For your opponent to get to your Mortek behind here, he's gonna have to go in range of Kanan somehow. So that's very strong, whereas in a straight on board, if I put the same fighter here, there's all these avenues around the side where they can get back into the backside and make it work. So longboarding is tactically smart if you can make it work. Not many people play it because they don't understand it. The other thing this does is it limits objective placement, but we'll go into more of that a little bit later. We're going to do a bit of a brain teaser here, and to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present you out there with a scenario, and I want you to tell me how you would react. And then together, we're going to go through my logic on what I would pick in a given situation. So for our first example, we have lovely little Morgok here. Your opponent's playing Morgoks, and they've, let's say, lost the dice roll-off, and you've opted them to place first. They've placed this board down here. This is what they're sort of playing as a defensive board, and you now have the choice to react. Now, let's say hypothetically in this scenario, you're playing Seraphon, you're playing the Starblood Stalkers. Now, what would you do in this given situation? How would you play this board setup to maximize your chance of winning this game? Let's assume the decks are normal. Let's not get into your crazy meta decks here. No aggro Seraphon or hold the 3 orcs. Let's stay with standard aggro orcs and hold objective Seraphon. Pause the video now. Think about what you do. Take your time. and then we'll come back and discuss it. Okay, so what I would do here is I would look at this board initially, and the things that jump out at me when playing against aggro warbands is where are their extreme starting hexes. With this board, there's one here in this corner, and there's two on this side here. So if I'm playing against this, what I want to do is try and limit the damage of these hexes. So let's start with this board here. I'll put this to the side here. I'm going to show this setup here like this. So let's say I played straight on, okay? Morgok player here actually probably likes this setup. He can put Morgok over here, and he can have an orc that's almost close into your territory. He moves 3, so we can reach this far in the first charge. And then he's still got this one here, which actually can get a pretty decent charge off into that second row in 2 spaces. Remember, you're playing 6 fighters, so you can leave one of them spare. So he's going to have good options turn 1 to charge. Even this guy back here isn't out of the fight. If he gets any sort of push forward, or if you place someone at the front there, he can get into the action. So this would generally be what a Morgok player wants. So if you're playing aggro, you kind of want this straight on board. Now let's flip it around a little bit. Let's change it. Let's say it's an offset board. Now we're doing max offset. We don't do any halvesies here. You don't do 1 hex. It's just bad play. You want to maximize. If you want to play straight on, play straight on. If you want to offset by a little bit, then all you're doing is making more of an offset here, which is helping you. If the offset doesn't help you, play straight on. So using this offset here, let's think about it. This is actually pretty good. This is probably what I would play. Morgok can go here. That's probably the furthest forward square he can go. And if you look at his turn 1 charges, he's got just the 2 hexes. In fact, you know what? I'm going to make this even better. I'm going to flip this board around. Look at that. Now he's only got the 1 charge. He can't actually get to this hex here. He can only make to this hex right there for initial charge. Well, that means with a 6-fighter warband, you can actually not deploy someone there. You can put Clacktrock back here. You can put your leader nice and safe at the back there. And his turn 1 is going to be spent moving forwards. It gives you a chance to get on your objectives. You're going to have 2 of them. That's okay. You'll score some stuff from that. Maybe dominant position, hidden purpose. But it gives you a chance to get some glory. Once you've got some glory, get some upgrades, and then turn 2 when he comes charging in, you're a bit stronger. So this is generally how I would play it. Let's have a look at the third option here. And this is longboarding. If I'm longboarding, I'm probably going this way, like this. Now, this is not too bad for Morgoks, because he does have 1 fighter here. Okay, that's not too bad. He can kind of get in. There's these 2 hexes at the front here that are a bit better. If you look at the opposite side here, there's obviously 2 hexes on there, so I can't flip it around and get an advantage like I could last time. But this isn't too bad because, yes, Morgok is going to get in here, but you can tell him, okay, these 2 squares here, that's where Morgok's going to hit, right? But he can't touch any of you guys back here. So if you want to keep your leader alive, you can pop him back here. He'll be safe, or put him a bit further forward. You can present him with bad options. The other advantage of this is these 2 squares back, hexes back here, I'll try and move that a bit closer. That's where his other 2 orcs are starting. If I move him forward 3, they get to here. That's not doing much damage in your territory, is it? Once again, gives you that 1 turn to score some glory, get ahead, maybe even take some range 3 pot shots. Not too bad, right? So I think of those 3 options, the second one, the offset board's probably the better one. That's how I would play. But you can make an argument, given your objective deck or what you've drawn into, on what you want to do deployment-wise for this. Obviously, you can't choose that when you place boards, so I would say get used to it. Also, check out which boards you have. Try and give some space on this side. You get to react, so maybe you push your starting hexes back here. Okay, we've got another example for you now, another brain teaser, now that you kind of know what we're talking about here. So this second example here, we've got the Grimwatch. That's your opponent. That's who they're picking. And you force them to place first. You're giving them 3 objectives, but you're choosing the orientation of the board. Now, you get to play as Rippers. That's a pretty good warband. They're pretty quick. Pause the video for a second and think, how would you set up against the Grimwatch with Rippers? Okay, figured it out? Good. I haven't either. That's okay. We're going to talk through it a little bit. Let's grab a board. We've got a random board here, and we've got this one here. I like this one. This has got 3 squares towards the front. So let's discuss a few options. Let's start with the straight on. We like the straight on board here. The thing about Grimwatch to remember is they have 7 fighters, which means all of the starting hexes have to have someone in it. Now, these blocked hexes here are actually really good for Grimwatch because they can kind of stop you from getting in a bit. They can put a fighter here and protect their leader. It's very good defensively, but that's okay. We're worried about getting in there and getting glory. So, with Rippers, how would you deploy here? Straight on's good. What you can do with that is you can put Ripper right in the middle. It's good to have him there so you have options with him. You kind of ripper in there first, so the other two get inspired. And then you've got two choices for your archer. You can put your archer here or here. And then turn one, they're getting a free shot. That's kind of nice. The other thing here is that it does give you 2 hexes at the front and just one hex back. So with Grimwatch, you want to go deep into their territory with all of your fighters to prevent them from inspiring. So by putting your starting hexes at the front here and giving yourself a wide range, your opponent A, can't create a wall along here of fighters that stop you from getting in physically. And B, once you're in, for him to get Ripper from there to there, he's going to have to push him 3 hexes. That's difficult. Not many people can do that. Maybe you get a drive back with 1 and then a distraction and you're still in his territory. And if you do that with all of your fighters, he's got to do that at least twice. So that's a pretty good setup. Let's move to the next setup, okay? Let's go to an offset board. We'll go a similar one. I think this side still works pretty good. This isn't terrible. And this might happen to you defensively sometimes. But this is okay. You can put Ripper here. And you actually put the spear guy here because he's got a range to attack to start with. And then you can put your archer either here or here. So that kind of works for you as well. You have the 4 speed to get in. The key thing is having these starting hexes close to your enemy's territory. Now what he can do here is deny you from coming in, because for you to get in this territory here, you don't really want to come charging into the middle here, because what's going to happen is that his leader is going to sit here, he's going to maybe push a guy in, he's going to have double supports, and he's just going to annihilate Ripper. Even though you get inspired on the other 2, Ripper won't last the first turn, which is not great. So what he's trying to do here is make it so that you have to kind of go around awkwardly to that side there and come in from weird angles. That's kind of what it does. And what it does mean is he can place his objectives towards the back, probably here, here, and here, and it makes it hard for you to get to at least 2 of them. Third board, the offset. So if I was offsetting here, I'm probably going like this. It's probably not the best setup. I wouldn't pick it with this because it's very easy for your opponent just to put a few enemies on this line here, make it hard for you to get in. Additionally, if you got a 4-move fighter and you're trying to get into his territory, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're 1 hex in. So all it takes is a good cheeky charge and a drive back, and then a distraction somewhere else with this guy, and you're not denying the Inspire and Grimwatch. The other thing is that Big Daddy Crackmarrow is sitting in the back there. You're not getting at him until at least turn 2. And I mean, that's 4 hexes, 1, 2, 3. And to get there turn 2, you need a pretty optimistic path to get there. So if you're playing Rippers, this might happen to you sometimes, but you might tend to be okay playing it. If they set this up against you, it's not too bad because you can deny the objectives, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when you're playing it, when you're forcing it, they're getting 3 objectives, which includes 1 in the corner back here. It's not good. In short, I think that the key objective or setup here for Crackmarrow versus Rippers is probably just a straight on, like this one here. That all flipped. It's pretty much hit or miss on which one I do, but play straight on when you're playing this. You're playing aggro into defensive. You want to open up your paths into your opponent. Our third brain teaser is a little bit of a tricky one. They're a warband that are a bit trickier to nail down. We're talking about Lady Harrow. She's a very strong warband. They win generally by doing a lot of their own thing. They won't fight you unless they have to. They're not holding 5 objectives, but they're a bit tricky and they score a lot of objectives. Make it hard to play against, and if you get the right board, you can make it a lot easier for yourself. But if you get the wrong board, you can make it very difficult. In this example, let's use Canaan's Reapers as his opponent. Big Canaan, bit of a tricky warband to deploy around, but we'll see how it goes. So if you're watching this, pause the video now. Think about it with this board here. Look at this board, there's 1 lethal hex here, a bunch of starting hexes, and then 2 on the extreme. How would you play this with Canaan's Reapers? Have you figured it out yet? Don't worry, it takes a bit of time to learn if you haven't, and if you have, good on you. Let's have a look at potential boards here. I'm going to grab this board here. I'm not saying this is the best board ever. I'm just grabbing a random one because the specifics on starting hexes do matter, but not for this example. So you're playing Canaan's Reapers against Mournflight. You pop it down straight on. Well, the question is sort of, what are you trying to do with this? We put Canaan down here, has a nice forward hex to get into enemy territory, but Lady Harrow is going to avoid Canaan. She doesn't want to fight him. You want to keep her locked down, and what happens is Canaan, he can charge forward here. He can hit quite a lot of starting hexes from this spot here. But the problem's going to be when she's not there anymore. She's going to come flying around here. They're going to come flying around here, and then suddenly Canaan's pulled in a lot of directions. He's forward, the Mortek are sitting at the back, and then the Lady Harrow isn't great at fighting all the time, but when it comes to Mortek, she can eat them alive pretty easily. 2 damage is perfect for killing Mortek. So anyway, that's not a very good board setup in my opinion. Let's have a look at some alternatives. Let's start with, let's just do a basic offset this way, like this. So this is another option. Obviously, Lady Harrow is going to do spooky things on her board. You can't worry too much about where she's going to deploy. She has a lot of options. She'll generally deploy at the 4 hexes away from you, I would say. But with this setup, it's a little better. You have the 4 hexes here. Any less is not optimal. And you have 2 hexes at the front here you can deploy at. Now, what I would say with this is you can deploy all of your Mortek here on these 5, and they're pretty good here, nice and safe. But generally, Lady Harrow, she's going to put a lethal X down somewhere. If she puts it here, you can put Kanan here. Although I think if she puts it here or here, you can put Kanan here. I think that Kanan being here is the better spot, but obviously lethal hexes make it kind of less desirable. So consider sort of where the lethal is before you deploy him. So then let's say you deploy him here. Let's don't worry about the lethal for now. Suddenly it's harder for Lady Harrow to get in. If she wants to come charging through, she's got full move. Let's say she hasn't inspired. Then, yeah, she can avoid Kanan barely by going here, but suddenly all it takes is a slight sidestep and you're in range. Whereas on the bigger board, she can get herself out quite far. It would take 2 or 3 moves to get there. And with Kanan sitting here in this choke point, the Ghosts are going to have a hard time getting into the back line here to kill the Mortek. If they do get there, they're probably taking a hit along the way. Let's look at the third option for your setup. And this one I think could actually work in this matchup. And this is the thing, it takes a bit of practice. There's no cheat sheet on how to do this properly. If you're playing passive Kanan's Reapers and you just want to sit back and let them come to you, longboarding could be a good option for you. You can pop Kanan right here at the front in the middle. And then suddenly Lady Harrow literally can't get around this giant bubble of him on this board without taking hits. And obviously she can move into it, but then she's stuck there for at least 1 hit. Maybe she gets away with it if she goes second, but in all likeliness, she's going to have a lot of Ghosts that are going to get free hits from Kanan this round, while the Mortek are sitting back here, either coming forward to support or just sitting on objectives. So longboarding here can work. It works well when they're quick and you need to lock them down, because when they do get into your territory, there's nowhere really for them to go. So I don't advocate longboarding too often because it's tricky, but I think this is a matchup where I would actually consider it. Just something to think about. Obviously, there's a lot that goes in here. There's no hard and fast rule. I'm not going to give you a spreadsheet and say, with Morgox against X, play this board in this orientation. That doesn't work like that. This game is more dynamic than that. But here's a little thought process on how you should place your boards. All right, now we're going to move on to the next part, arguably the more important part of the setup, and that is the objectives and lethal placement. Some matchups it won't matter as much, but it may. But a lot of matchups will be built around where you place your objectives, who gets them, where are they, and how you can make them work for you. So let's talk a little bit about a very generic matchup here. Let's start with this board here. We're going to play Grimwatch, the king of the hold objective warbands, or at least one of the kings right now. And we'll put him against Morgox, a good old aggro warband. This is just aggro versus hold objective. Let's say hypothetically, this board here is a bit tricky. We're going to go for a very standard one. Let's say the Grimwatch player chose to place his board second. And the reason we're saying that is because he's got this great offset and no Orc player would allow this in 1,000 years, I don't think. So we'll play it that way. So Orc player gets to place his objective first. Now, when you look at objectives as the Orc player, we're going to be playing it from his perspective here because he has the tempo by placing 3. What does he want to do? He wants to do a few things. One, he wants to make it very difficult for the Grimwatch player to hold 3 objectives. And 2, he wants to avoid this. That is a lethal square in that one choke point. He wants to be able to move through here without taking damage. So how does he do that? Well, you do it by placing an objective there. That's pretty simple. There are some other ways though. So if you're the Orc player here and you're looking to place objectives, what do you do for your first one? Well, if you think about the Grimwatch player's perspective, he can't place one there straight away because it's an edge hex. He can place one here though. And if he places one here or here, I'll flip him over to make it more visible. If he places it here or here, suddenly you can't place your objective here. So by placing your objective, let's say here, as the Orc player, then you actually shut down this entire section here from being an objective. The downside though is that he kind of wants his objective to be over here. But there is a positive to that, which we'll get to in a second. The Grimwatch player then places his next objective, and given his starting hex, he's probably got a few options, but let's say he places it here. Maybe this is a bit closer so you guys can see a bit easier on the camera. That's probably the best spot for him. If I'm playing Grimwatch, I want it as far back as possible, and I want to give myself room. Now this is a very interesting situation because there's a few choices here from the Orc player. One is that you want to try and avoid getting a one here. You're trying to give him as little objectives as possible. So if you're Orc player, this is kind of the scary spot, although actually you've kind of shut down a lot of this. But if I'm you, I place one here, just in no man's land. And I'll explain why in a second. Because one, you still want to keep this one open. You want your objective there. It's also in range for your charges, so it's good. But also he's got to come forward for this one, that's good. Now here comes the tricky part. If you're the Grimwatch player here, you have one objective left. Where can you place it? You can place it nowhere on this board, at least nowhere I can see. So you have to place it on the Orc board. The best spot for that's probably down here. It's quite far away. The key thing here to keep in mind is that if he doesn't place one on the Orc board, let's say there's space somewhere for him. Let's say this one's over here or something, and he can kind of squeeze one in. Let's say he could squeeze one in like that. Let's say it's like that. This objective here is actually risky for the Grimwatch player because he's probably going to have swift capture. If he places one there, you can place one on an edge hex, so you can really you can put it here if you want. It's a bad example. But now the Grimwatch player has swift capture and he cannot score it in the game without moving an objective out, which he might be able to do, but it gets tricky. Anyway, let's go back to where we were because I've kind of moved on quite a bit of things there. So I believe we were here. Grimwatch player's placed 4 there, and then you can place your one here. And if you look at the objective placement from the Orc player, you're probably feeling like there's a lot in his territory. But if you think about it, he's got 2 safe ones, these 2. There's not much you can do about that. Grimwatch players are going to get a couple of objectives. But these 2 here, number 1 and number 2, are very dangerous for them. As soon as they move someone on there, you can charge in and knock them straight back off or kill them. There's 2 squares here, so you can get 2 guys in there. This one here is just a death trap because you can get charged with all 3 of your starting hexes initially. So suddenly you've got a decent setup here. The next step is your lethal hex. Where do you put your lethal hex if you're playing against this? Well, it's actually a bit tricky. What are you trying to do to deny his space? You can place a lethal to deny him placing one adjacent. So let's say actually this objective wasn't there. Let's say you do it this way. You can actually place a lethal square there. And then suddenly the Grimwatch player isn't allowed to place one here. So if that's the case, he'll put one here. And then suddenly your path's still open. So even if you don't get the objective there, you can still create this nice path to get through safely. But hypothetically here, the lethal's a very important square to put things. If you're the Grimwatch player, you're probably looking at this square here. You want to make it hard for him to get to objective 1. There or there. Can't put it on a starting hex, remember. But if you're the Orc player, there's a few options. You can put it here. It helps drive them back into the objective, into the lethal square there. If you get a good 2 damage off initially, you can kill the 3 wound fighters. Obviously, Crackmarrow's not going to jump in there, so there's no point there. Or you can put it back here somewhere and look for later in the game. Generally, you want to look at, okay, what fighters need the lethal for me to kill? And for Orcs into Crackmarrow, it's going to be just Crackmarrow. Where's he going? Back here. Well, if you're going to kill him early on the game, having that lethal there could be mighty handy. Or it might make him place it somewhere else because he wants to save Crackmarrow. A little bit more dangerous. So you got a lot of options here with objectives. What I see a lot of people doing with this setup, they're playing Orcs. And they're like, okay, I get 3 objectives. I'm going to put one here. Great, cool. You don't get that one. Well, okay, I'll put one here. I'll put my other one here. Oh, you don't get that one. Cool. All right, I'll put mine here. I'm going to put mine here. Great, cool. I'll put my lethal hex. Yeah, I'll put it back here. And then this happens. And the Grimwatch player has suddenly shut down that attack. This board setup here, which you see a lot, that wasn't legal, that one goes there. If you think about it, it's exactly the same as what we just saw because you've still got 2 pretty safe objectives. These 3 are hard to get to, but that is how it is. So the difference is this lethal, and the other thing is the bait of the 3rd objective. By having it there, you make the Grimwatch player think, ooh, I could go forward and grab that. And then that's kind of like putting him in a sticky situation, giving him a bad choice. You want them to come forward to you. That'd be great for you. And giving them that sort of, that little juicy bait might work for you. Anyway, that's this board setup. Let's look at the next one. For our next example, we're going to look at something a bit more unusual. Now, you haven't seen Longboards much played in your games. We haven't seen it much on the channel. It's a bit hard to figure out. But if it does happen, it's generally going to be when you don't want it to happen. So you got to figure out how you could take advantage of it. Now, if I get my objectives out here, here we have an example. We've shown this exact setup before. It's Mournflight into Canaan's. And we spoke about how Canaan loves this position. He's sitting in the middle here. He's big. He can hold a lot of this space. Now the question is, as the Mournflight player, what can you do? Canaan's picked this. So how do you counter? Well, you counter with objectives. On a longboard like this, what it does is it creates a lot of edge hexes. Now the thing to keep in mind is you can't place an objective on an edge hex, which means there's a lot of squares here that they can't place an objective. So if you place first, instead of placing back here on your board, you place one here, right? This is the trick against longboarding, against slow warbands like Canaan. You place one there, you give them that one. The closest objective they can place to the back of their board is here, or here on the other side, these two squares. Everything back here is within 2 hexes or an edge hex. And because you went first with the objectives, they can't place an edge hex back here. So if they're trying to hold objectives and they've longboarded you, you can do this and make it difficult. Third one, you get that one, you can put it back here. It's all yours. Fourth one for them. The furthest forward they can put this one is actually no man's land, right there in the middle. And then the fifth one you can put down here. Now look at that. If you're the defensive warband player trying to sit back, or you're playing Canaan, you kind of can't sit back. Your fighters are going to be sitting around this area of the board. And if you're Lady Harrow, you can be really mean, just put a lethal somewhere around here. We'll get into lethals in a second. And then obviously Canaan's not going to place a lethal because it doesn't hurt them at all. So Canaan's got to suddenly move forward a little bit here. And that's okay, he can move forward, but it forces them into an uncomfortable situation where they're fighting over the middle here. The Mortek need to get up to here and here, which then suddenly gives you these paths where you can charge in and kill them into the lethal perhaps, or just kill them outright. So, a lot of options there. For our last example, we're going to look at aggro versus aggro. And most of you are like, well, why are you doing objective placement for aggro versus aggro? I'll tell you why. It's these two little bad boys right here, the lethal hexes. In aggro versus aggro, having that extra damage means sometimes you can get that kill early on when you don't expect it, and you can kind of get a bit of an advantage that way. So in this case, we've got Morgoths versus Rippers, two great Beastgrave warbands that just fight. That's their job. If you ever played this matchup, you'll know objectives aren't usually that important, but it does actually matter, and I'll explain why in a second. So here we've got Ripper's side of the board. Let's say he places first. The key thing is, if you place an objective in a square, your opponent can't place a lethal hex there. So the simple part of it is, put your objectives where you don't want your opponent to put a lethal hex. Seems simple. Here, he can drive back these two starting hexes into this, so I'm going to put an objective there. Morgok player's going to do, well, he can't put one there. Maybe I'm scared of him driving back there with Morgok, so I'll put an objective all the way back at the board here. All right, well, there's another list over here. 2 starting hexes and a lethal. I'll put that one there. Cool, flip that over. Then suddenly they're protected. And then Morgok player's going to put one here to stop these two driving into that. Cool. And then you got a 5th one, and you can use a 5th one a lot of ways. A bit hard to get because it'll be within 2 hexes. Let's say you put it in the middle. This one doesn't matter too much. Now, if you're the Morgok player, or if you're the Ripper player and you're putting a lethal hex down, where do you put it? You can kind of put it here. It's not terrible. Suddenly to get him into that one, though, you've got to kind of charge awkwardly around against the wall. And that's generally not good because sometimes you can get trapped in there. Also, you kind of can't get across if you need to. Although it's Ripper, so maybe you can. Or you can put it maybe back behind here. Or you can put it in the way of the charge. Maybe you can see him coming in here for this square. You can put it there. Suddenly that charge onto this starting fight, let's say Ripper's here, is not that viable early on without taking a damage. Obviously you can still charge that square if you put someone there. Or if you don't put someone there, you can charge around into there. But if you do start both these squares, this could reduce his options. The other part of lethals, and I'll explain this, is how I place them in most matchups, is I look at the board and I think, where am I going to be fighting? If I'm playing Morgoks, I'm playing a slow warband, they're playing Rippers, chances are I'm going to be fighting around this area a bit more, closer on my territory, because I can't get in there as fast as he can, or maybe quite far away, who knows. But if I put a lethal sort of on his side of that, that's where that makes sense. I think it makes more sense if I show you with a different warband. Let's say we do, still do Morgoks, we're going to do it against Canaans. I do this quite a bit, I play a lot of Canaans. If I'm Canaan and I'm placing a lethal hex, I'm thinking, well, where are they going to fight me? Well, it's a bit hard on this board because there's a lot going on, but I'm thinking they're probably going to come in over here for these fighters. Killing Morgoth's hard. And obviously, if Morgoth places a lethal there, I can just put my starting fighter there and leave that empty. So this side of the board's kind of covered. So if I put a lethal hex sort of somewhere over here, maybe there. Let's do that one. This square here. Suddenly if they come flying over there for damage, or to kill Mortex, you can counter with Mortex, do 2 damage and push them in a lethal for 3. 2 health left, that's much more manageable than the 5 that was initially happening. Or if they have 3 health left and there's no lethal there, it takes usually 2 more activations with Kanans to get them out, except with obviously Kanan himself. So generally with lethals, I think, where am I going to be fighting my opponent? And I put a lethal on his side of that area. I don't want it on my side, I don't want to hit my own lethal. I would suggest with your lethal placement, if you don't know where to play it, if you're struggling on, I don't know where it goes, play some games. At the start of the game, think about your lethal, place it somewhere. And at the end of the game, before you analyze how bad your dice rolls were or how unlucky you were with your objective cards, look at that lethal hex and say one of 3 things. One is that lethal hex had no impact at all in the game. That lethal hex had negative impact for me, as in I was pushed into it and it hurt my movement more than my opponent's. Or the opposite, where 3, which is where we want to get to, it hurt my opponent, it got me some kills that I needed, and it was really beneficial. Obviously, that's the case. Obviously, if you're playing against ghosts, as in Briar Queen or Mournflight, don't put it down at all. But against those other warbands, think about it. Now, it's hard to obviously remember, by the end of the game, you probably moved on and thinking about other things, but come back to it and think about it. If you do that for 10 games, I guarantee you'll start knowing where you should put your lethals in every matchup. The last piece of strategy I'm going to talk to you guys about is arguably the most important when you're looking at the mindset of how to place objectives. It's also the one where you can kind of see the logic in place the most. We're going to play a very standard hold objective warband on one board and a very standard aggro warband on the other. So you can see on the board here, we have these 2 warbands facing off. Now, in this scenario, we're going to assume, based on the board setup, the aggro player has chosen to go second with their board placement, meaning the hold objective warband is going to get 3 objectives. Now, we spoke about this being optimal, and obviously this is great for the for the aggro warband. They're going to have 4 hexes here at the front where they can get some nice charges turn 1. The poor skeletons are going to have to survive some hits, but they will get 3 objectives. But there's still more the aggro warband can do here, and we're going to go through that now. So let's start. Let's say you're a skeleton player. You're thinking, where do I place my objectives? I'm going to put my first one down at the back, right there. That's a very good spot. And then now, as the aggro warband player, what I see a lot of players do is go, oh cool, I'll put one here in my territory, sure. That's the generic, like, I haven't really thought about it, I'm going to do that, because you're taught very early in Underworlds. Have objectives in your territory. A lot of the early decks have hold 1, hold 2 in it, or hold objective 3 is in the starter decks. Here I'm saying that's not the case. You can place your objective aggressively to make their setup worse. I'm going to show it here with this objective placement right here. That objective 4 is very far forward. If you have a look, 1, 2, these 2 fighters can get a charge off on that objective early on. If that objective is back here, for example, you aren't doing that. By placing that objective there, now we come back to the skeleton player. And he's looking at his territory going, oh, where do I put my objective here? And he hasn't really got a good spot. All this space around here has been blocked by this forward objective. So naturally he goes here. Now we're going to think about, okay, where do you want to place yours? And there's a lot of options for this. Now you can just put one in your territory here like this at the front. I think that's probably the better spot. You can also look at putting it back here and blocking one of those lethal hexes that we spoke about earlier. But against skeletons, I don't think you need it. You can keep it here, nice and safe. If you have the opportunity to, and maybe we can look at it this way, if you put it in neutral territory like this, let's say we've put 4 here. I don't think this is optimal. I think this is the better spot. But let's say we do this, and we put 3 here. Suddenly swift capture is coming to question. The whole objective warband, the skeletons here, if they have swift capture in their deck, they've got a choice. They can place it back in this corner here. It can be placed on an edge hex. It's nice and safe. They can keep that. If they do that, they have a dead objective in their hand. Or they've got to place it in your territory. That's really up to them. If they leave it back here, they're going to draw it first hand absolutely every time. So we'll go back to our initial setup. This is what we're thinking. Let's just pop it here. And they get to put their last one down. And let's say they put it here. It's a little bit better to put it here than here. It's very similar, but here you're getting trapped more often than you are here from a lot more angles. So this is our setup for the board. You have lethals. The skeleton player gets to place it first. They're probably going to put it somewhere around here, and then you can put yours somewhere at the back because you don't really need it. So this is the setup. Now let's evaluate this board position here because I'll show you the alternative and what they get if you don't do anything. So if you're the orc player, you've got your 4 starting hexes here, and you have 3 objectives very close and in striking range, meaning we are fighting for the first turn. In this area here, you're controlling the objectives. He's got a safe one, number 1 and number 5. You're really not going to get to those 2 at the start of the game. That's okay, give him 2. Let him maybe have a glory with hidden purpose. If you can try and stop dominant position, sure, but he's not going to get that much glory off that. He wants to be holding 3 and getting supremacy and all those sort of ones. Also with this, if you look at the particular warband, we've got head crackers. There's an objective here. So if he hasn't got any models near it, you can charge an archer onto it and get primacy, which is obviously going to help you out. That's a real niche thing. Now let's look at the alternative here. Let's say we played this normally. Let's look at the difference in setup here. Let's say we just do a good old 1 objective there. I'm going to put 1 on my back. He's going to put his second one somewhere nice and safe. He wants to put 1 here, so we can put 1 here. You can think ahead. And then you put 1 in your territory. And then he puts 1 in the corner here. Now look at this setup. We'll throw some lethals down. We'll say here and we'll say here, just the same. This setup is what you've probably seen in a lot of your games. You have 3 safe objectives for skeletons. These orcs aren't going to get onto objective 4 in this setup. The only difference is you've created these 2 that are untouchable, but the skeleton player isn't going to really get to those anyway. So what I'm saying, if you think about your deployment and start zoning out areas, you start forcing these kind of boards, and then you're fighting where the objectives are. Especially against fast warbands. If you're playing aggro and you have 2 objectives back there, say you're playing against Seraphon, you charge forward here. Then suddenly he goes around and gets onto that objective back here. Maybe the chameleon goes back there. Then you got to turn around and get him. But if the objectives are nice and close to where you're fighting, for example like this, then you can stick around here. It's quite easy for you just to get onto those. You can control these 4 pretty easily. And this one here in this corner you can kind of ignore for a bit. So that's kind of the logic behind that setup. Think about it when you're playing aggro. Place your objectives. Think about their territory, how you can force the ones they place towards the front, closer to your charging fighters. So check out this look and try and aim for this when you're playing your next game as aggro. And now we move to the last piece of advice, and this is with the second roll-off of the game to decide who places their fighter first. This is a very simple thing. You don't need to think too much about it. You can write this down and do it every game because getting that extra crit on the 3rd dice roll is more important than seeing where your opponent places their fighters. So the rule is very simple. If you win the roll-off, if you have the same number of fighters, so let's say you have 3 versus 3 or 5 versus 5, you place your fighter first. In every other situation, they should place theirs first. Simple as that. Just put that in your head and you'll be golden. Anyway, thank you guys for watching our first strategy video. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to see some more, please let us know. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.